Hi, this is Lenny Pfeffer, President of the Dorchester County Council, and you're listening to the Maryland Association of Counties Conduit Street Podcast, the source for news and notes on Maryland's policy and politics.
Hello and welcome to the Conduit Street Podcast. Kevin Kinnally back here in the Conduit Street studio on Conduit Street with Michael Sanderson. Michael, we're back recording in person. It feels like it's been a while.
It has been a while since we've been face to face, and I don't know, our listeners can't get this, but you and I end up with sort of like a little code with hand signals and eye motions and things like that. So it's a different experience. I like it better recording in person. And we got a bunch of stuff to cover today. I feel like, I don't know, I'll tell you, one of my favorite, I think of it as a podcast. It's a radio show, but I downloaded it as a podcast called Marketplace. Right. So it's kind of in the royalty of this sort of thing, I think.
Yep.
And on Marketplace, they have a bit where they do their opening story or two, and then the host, Kai Risdall, he says, now let's do the numbers.
Right.
And then they go through like what happened in the stock market and that sort of thing.
Right.
And I feel like we're due for a let's do the numbers because there's so many fiscal things going on. So let's do the numbers today.
There is a lot going on, and we are going to talk about Maryland's money picture. The state, in recent news, just closed fiscal 25 with a surplus, but that does not mean smooth sailing, so we'll get into that. Deficits are on the horizon. Transportation finances just took a big hit with a new audit, and counties, especially when it comes to road fundings, are staring at a cliff. And on top of that, Washington is again staring down a government shutdown. Michael, the odds of that are rising every minute, and that has huge implications for Maryland. So, Michael, let's get in. Number one, we'll start off with this fiscal chat with the fiscal 25 surplus. Maryland, as I said, did end fiscal 25 with $500 million ahead in terms of a surplus, $521 million to be exact, Michael. But let's get into that and what that actually means.
Yeah, I mean, end the year with a fiscal surplus just means you have some there's like a balance left in your checkbook after you paid all your bills. Right. And this doesn't necessarily mean that everything is Jake, everything's swimming, everything's perfect. Right. I think for context, $500 million in almost any context is a giant pile of money.
Definitely here. Yeah,
right?
sure.
Right?
Yeah.
But as a practical matter, the state's general fund budget, I think this year got to about $26 billion.
Mm-hmm.
So this is like a 2% of the whole budget, which basically means like you budgeted sensibly, and some of the news wasn't quite as bad as you feared it might be. I mean, there was a bunch of uncertainty about what might happen with federal employees, a bunch of other things like that.
Right.
And so, you make a somewhat conservative estimate of what revenues will look like. They beat those numbers nominally, and so you end up with a little more in the bank at the end of the year. But honestly, like the real drivers behind this look kind of shaky. I mean, capital gains was a chunk of this. Stock market had a pretty good cycle. Some people cash out. They pay one-time money in capital gains.
And we know that's notorious, right?
Yeah, that's a notorious blip. Right? And some you can have 3 blip years in a row, but it's not the same as a whole bunch more people got jobs, started working, and were withholding and gathering income tax from new jobs. That's predictable year to year. Capital gains and stuff like that tends to be non-recurring.
And some of this reminds me of COVID, when you're trying to estimate revenues. There are so many unknowns right now. And during the pandemic, we were talking about how difficult it was to understand and try and figure out what people were going to do, how they were going to react. There is so much certainty right now, just in terms of Maryland and where we are in the federal government and job losses and all these different things. I'd say, within 2% is pretty good. I mean, if you and I were estimating revenues, and I know it's a tough job, but you're like you said, it's 2%. Right.
And as a practical matter, I think maybe this is a new normal, right? I mean, it is so difficult to guess what's really going on in the American economy when you have complicated mixed signals. I mean, there are indications we might be entering a stagflation period where we have low growth and actual moderate to high inflation. It's possible that the Federal Reserve is thinking about that too. They do a small rate cut. They're worried about inflation still. Who knows what the heck is going on? But even the folks who do this for a living 24/7 are kind of throwing darts.
Right. So don't expect us to have the answers is what we're saying. But again, this is a difficult time to try and project revenues. But Maryland did end the year with some more cash in the sock, more than they thought they would. And Michael, the state set that money aside, right? Most of that went into reserves. So we're talking about the rainy day fund. That's now at about $2.4 billion. And then you put 270 or so million into the general fund. So that's smart budgeting. I think most people would say it's always good to have a backup. Putting that money away is never a bad thing. But that's where it ended, right? That money did not go right into services.
Right. Yeah. And then that's the nature of an annual budget is the governor proposes a budget in January. The General Assembly is in session for that 90-day window to give consideration to all those things. They issue a final budget. That gets done by the spring. We don't ordinarily say, oh, well, we closed out with a little extra cash. Let's bring everybody to town and decide how to spend $500 million. Right. You put it in the sock and it gives you some cushion for next year, which there are indications we might need. I mean, the public forecast that we've seen already suggests, we've got like a $250 million problem looming for FY27.
Right.
That's the budget we need to build starting January. So having 500 in the bank is a really good insurance. It's a good hedge against maybe a softish year coming up. And the reality is the multi-year forecast continues to have a big asterisk in it. So independent of what happens with growth in the Maryland economy, that drives revenues, and independent of what happens with maybe some of these federal changes, we'll talk a little more about that, but federal changes may have some effect on our revenues and our economy and so forth. But the big asterisk in the state's fiscal forecast for the general fund is we've been paying for the blueprint, this big, ambitious 10-year education plan. We're almost halfway through the rollout, and the state has had money in an education trust fund to pay for those extra costs. So the general fund hasn't really had to bear the cost of the blueprint yet, but we run out of money in the piggy bank after FY27. You get to FY28. That's going to be January of calendar year 27. They come back. It'll be new delegates and senators. A new General Assembly comes to town.
Welcome to Annapolis.
Yeah, they'll hear a budget which suddenly has a crisis in the billions because the blueprint is expensive. It's ambitious. We're trying to accomplish really big things. The price tag is big, and it's going to land in the general fund that year. So we're not far away from another shock to the budget, but I think this is short-term pretty good news for next year not being a crisis.
Right. So next year, not necessarily a crisis, but the budget that they need to build next year is going to start to get into that crisis zone. And then when you get to fiscal 30, you're looking at a $3.6 billion with a B dollar deficit, right? So and you talked about why the blueprint coming out of the general fund. Yeah. That certainly is why we see those numbers rise. That's the main driver, right?
Right. And I mean, who knows? If things take a turn for the better, if the American economy revs up and Maryland comes along with it, or we make some gains and double down on some of our own strengths and do better. If Maryland revenues go back to growing 4 or 5% a year instead of the 1 or 2 that we've been seeing, then some of those numbers look an awful lot better a few years out, and that's what we all like to see.
We'd love to see that, but and Michael, you mentioned it. The OB3, the OBBB, however you want to call it, that adds to the challenge, right? And this is the Federal Reconciliation Act, the big bill that Congress passed. And when the state's budget planners first built it into the forecast, they expected the baseline numbers to grow in Maryland, right? So they look at all the provisions in the OB3, and there are many of them, and how they will affect Maryland's bottom line. And initially, they expected it to boost revenues, Michael. But when you dig into the numbers, we've seen now a new report from the Comptroller's office. That's not exactly the story.
Right. So I think first, hats off to the Office of the Comptroller for they took their time on this. I mean, everybody wants to see. I want to see the fiscal note
immediately,
morning,
right?
And they said we've got some general outlines, but give us some time so we can actually crunch the numbers, because this is more complicated than let's just look at a batch of old returns and apply the new law to it. Right. And you can do that for a lot of things with income taxes. Right. The Comptroller's office is really good at that in the middle of legislative session, saying this is $39 million. We can tell you why, because we pulled, we surveyed a bunch of tax returns from prior years and applied the old taxes to it.
Right.
Here, the federal changes are a big enough deal that they're almost certainly going to affect taxpayer decision making. And so they're gonna change, or they have the potential to change how people file, whether they file individually or married filing jointly, whether they itemize their deductions or whether they take a more generous standard deduction. And all those things are kind of moving parts that make it much harder to pin down the fiscal effects.
Right.
So this is like a little bit beneath the hood kind of stuff.
Trying to predict taxpayer behavior.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So that's trickier than let's just snapshot it and apply a new tax rate.
Right.
So I think doing the work here to crunch the right numbers is the right way to go. I would say on all of this though, I mean, they acknowledge it in the report, but it's not intuitive. There's an asterisk on this too, and that is the federal government, generally speaking, they use a 10-year scorecard. Annapolis is big into the 1-year fiscal note.
Right.
This is a $20 million effect, and what we mean by that is $20 million per year.
Right.
The feds seem to be in love with let's take the cumulative 10-year effect of anything that's on the table, add it together, and then they would talk about that same $20 million thing as a $200 million score.
Right.
Right. So they use different terminology. That's fine. There's nothing inherently wrong with that, except you can play games with a 10-year count.
No.
Right?
No.
Our friends in Washington might occasionally do this, but when they have a plan that has a multi-year effect, and you'll have members of one chamber or another saying, "I'm not willing to expand the federal, the national debt or deficit. We don't want to expand the national debt by more than $2 trillion or some enormous sounding figure, right? But in order to come in under that score and get Senator so-and-so to say yes, you'll play these tricks like it's a 10-year plan, but this piece is only included for 6 years. And then this very popular item, and
there are lots of those in the OBBB, by the way. Right.
So in 2017, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, if I have the federal
TCJA,
they use titles for everything.
Yeah.
But in 2017, there were a whole bunch of tax cuts for individuals, for corporations, for big hitters. They changed the standard deduction for little people and so forth. It was lots of meaningful changes, but a lot of that stuff was scheduled to disappear after 4, 5, 6 years. So we've just got to the window where this year you had to extend a bunch of that stuff.
Right.
So for Maryland's purposes, how do you measure the Maryland fiscal note? Do you like cover your eyes and pretend that all that stuff was really going to expire?
Right.
In which case you have a pretty dramatic fiscal note here. And that's technically the honest way to call it. This is what would have happened. This is what would have happened if they had passed nothing.
Right.
I think the realistic expectation was the feds were always going to extend most of those tax cuts and changes from 2017. And so my mental sort of baseline is different from the policy baseline that all this is going to expire.
Right.
So
I think that makes sense to look at it that way.
I mean, so when we see some numbers in there that are suggesting some positives to the state and potentially to the counties, I think there's a huge footnote there that it's positive to a future that almost certainly was never going to take place.
Right.
And in fact, this ends up being a modest negative relative to the trajectory that we all believed that we were on.
Right.
So I'm sorry, a little bit long-winded, but for our listeners or readers on the Conduit Street blog who have seen your breakdown, read the comptroller's report, some of them might be coming away saying, what's going on here?
Right.
Those numbers seem quirky.
Right.
That's the main thing to keep in mind is they're measuring against the law, not against the rational expectation. And there's nothing wrong in doing it that way. It kind of gives you a head fake.
So current policy versus projected law. And we'll post links, of course, to all this Conduit Street coverage that we have. But I do think it's worth, Michael, that little tidbit there to explain exactly what these numbers mean and don't mean. And that's the revenue side. But the OBBB also increases costs, as we've talked about, especially for SNAP, the administration of SNAP, and for Medicaid redeterminations. So by fiscal 28, Michael, those added obligations climb to almost $170 million a year for Maryland. We know that some of this stuff is delayed for weird reasons, like Maryland's error rate is super high, so we don't see some of this stuff right away. We haven't seen the massive layoffs that maybe some folks expected to happen right away. So some of this stuff is delayed. Some of this stuff is not as bad as we thought it might be when we initially saw that bill and saw it pass. But certainly those obligations are going to start adding up and they're going to become a problem in the out years.
Right. And there are whispers that some of those official forecasts might be understated.
Right.
I've already heard that the guess is that correctly managing the supplemental nutrition program, which this was a classic shift, just like we complained that the state government shifted costs onto counties, the federal government has actively just decided to shift responsibilities onto the states. So Maryland's going to have to pick up slack where the feds have walked away. We're going to have to run these programs, and doing it may be more expensive than these. $170 million is a floor, not a ceiling.
Yep.
And then we'll see what happens with Medicaid. If it turns out we have a wide range of Marylanders losing coverage, then you have a policy question as well. I mean, it's almost a third dimension of this. Revenues probably come down. Costs are definitely going up.
Right.
And there's also probably Marylanders losing service who either are going to be a burden on our health infrastructure, they'll be in the emergency room, they'll be at county clinics and so forth, or Maryland steps up and finds some way to extend them coverage through the Affordable Care Act and through health exchanges, or through some state-funded Medicaid extension, but that's got a big price tag too.
Right.
So this is tension in multiple directions, all pointing basically the wrong way if you're trying to make the budget balancing.
All the arrows are head the wrong way. Yeah, less money coming in, more money going out. And, counties also rely on the same income tax base. So a lot of that volatility does flow through to county finances. Yeah. And Michael, you just mentioned cost shifts. When Annapolis is staring at billion-dollar deficits, multi-billion-dollar deficits, we know counties are vulnerable to cost shifts. Just like you said, the feds have shifted costs. We know that when Annapolis is in trouble, one of the first places they look is to the counties, and the counties can pay for more and do more things. So that's something we need to guard against, and we're certainly aware of heading into the next session and the sessions after that, because this is not a problem that's going away anytime soon. And speaking of problems, Michael, let's talk transportation, right? I mean, we're here, right? We got to do all the things, all the tough things. So let's talk about transportation. Big deal for local governments. We've talked a lot about highway user revenue. We're going to get into more of that now. But Michael, something new, a new audit found from the Department of Legislative Services, the nonpartisan Department of Legislative Services. They audited the SHA, the State Highway Administration, and found that the SHA knowingly, quote unquote, knowingly charged $359 million in excess projects to federal accounts, with the understanding and knowing that that money would never likely be reimbursed by the feds. So Michael, what's going on here? We have a big piece on the blog kind of breaking this down, but let's hear the Michael Sanderson version of what's going on.
I'm doing my best, and you and I have had some conversations about this, trying to piece it together. I think the most important piece for us is on the back end, that this is going to be a squeeze on transportation generally. But my take is this isn't an audit finding that someone was walking away with bags of money.
Right. So no one took the money. The money did not get misappropriated.
Right. So, I mean, we've had things like that happen in the public sector, and that's, a terrible, terrible situation. This, I think, is a matter of just too much optimism on how much we could count on the federal government to participate in a variety of road and transportation projects. And I think this is an area where it's possible to miss the mark in good faith. I don't know whether what happened here is just a really bad example of guessing wrong, or whether it's an example of let's be super optimistic. I'm a bird watcher, and from time to time, someone will come out of the woods and they'll say, "Oh, yeah, right around that corner, you guys all just missed it, but I just saw this really rare bird over there,
right,
and I'm going to put it on my list, and that's going to be a really big sighting for the day." And the other folks in the group are sort of like nodding their head. They're like, "Well, it's really what good fortune would strike you again this year that you found the craziest bird right around the corner from all the rest of us." I don't know what happened there. This isn't a matter of we're broke because the money got spent in the wrong place.
Right.
But I think it is a matter of the 6-year consolidated transportation plan or programs, CTP, is basically a list of these are the things we plan to invest in and work on and get done over the next 6-year period. We have probably rose-colored that document. That's probably got more yeses on projects than we really can afford if the feds can't come through with their share on stuff.
And essentially, Michael, so this is, you have a giant list of projects and you have two pots of money. You have the state pot, the federal pot. And basically what they were saying is, we think that the federal pot's going to get a lot bigger and that they're going to pay for all these projects so we can book more projects. Right. And this apparently started small, Michael, right? In 2020, they were, under $10 million that they had kind of booked to the feds that maybe was in question that the feds would not reimburse. But then it exploded to more than $350 million by this year. And you would think that would trigger some red flags and audits and such. And that's what happened.
Right. So the General Assembly has an audit division that goes through every agency and looks over their books. And this is making sure things are reported accurately, but they also look at practices like these. And this is where this arises as, this is a weakness. You shouldn't have done that. This is an error or a mal-action or whatever. So anyway, it's been flagged. It's out in the air now. I think it's going to be, ultimately though, it's going to be a squeeze on our transportation plan. That's going to be the bottom line, is that the state may have said, I don't know what the right number is, but the state may have said, we've got 115 projects that we think we can afford to support over the 6-year period. But that was booking this bag of money from the feds. That's probably never going to happen. And if that doesn't happen, you probably only could have done 95 instead of 115 or something along those lines. There's going to be a shortfall, and some yes projects are now actually maybe projects.
Right. And so if the feds don't come through, the state is going to have to backfill that money, and that's either going to come out of the TTF, the Transportation Trust Fund, Michael, or even the general fund, right? And that becomes a big problem for counties, right?
Right. I mean, so yeah, this could end up being, let's make good on all the projects we've committed to in the CTP plan. It also could be, we just have to cancel a bunch of projects that are popular and wanted and needed, and therefore safety, and therefore congestion, and therefore quality of life and so forth. So none of those are great outcomes. And that's brought on by this maybe unguarded practice that's shown up in this audit. But if it's a squeeze on transportation writ large, it becomes a county problem itself, right? This then hands the baton to the thing that that Baltimore City, municipal governments, and county governments all depend on. We need a slice of the transportation pie from the state in the form of highway user revenues to come back to local governments for all the roads and bridges we maintain, which is like 5 out of 6 road miles across the state.
Right. And so because highway user revenues come from the TTF, and basically all that money, all the transportation funds are in one big pot. If you have to take money out of the TTF, that's going to be fewer dollars for highway user, fewer dollars for projects that counties like across the state. So you're really in this tough spot. And as we get into highway user revenue, Michael, we're talking about this being another problem on top, because highway user revenues for counties and for Baltimore City are going to fall off a cliff very soon. Michael, let's talk about that. Progress that we've made over the years, but we're facing this cliff now. And these other issues that are sort of surrounding transportation generally also cause a direct problem for highway user revenue, potentially, if all these things come to fruition.
Right. I mean, so the history on this is a frustrating one, that we know tough times make for some unfortunate budget decisions, right? I mean, stuff gets cut that are still important and popular and so forth. And then typically what happens is, once we're out of the woods with the economy, you kind of piece back the things that you had to slow down or cut away in the toughest of times.
Right.
Back in 2008, 2009, the stock market's falling apart. There's a massive housing bubble. All these investment banks are going broke. The feds are doing, immediate relief to keep these different companies from falling apart. It's a crisis situation. Maryland was definitely feeling it. The governor at the time said, I've held off as long as I could, but we have to go to highway user revenues. We have to ding the local governments. And they took what ended up being more than 90% of the share for most of the county governments and for municipal governments who get that money.
And to be clear, like for non-regular listeners, highway user revenue, this is the money that we need to maintain, the 5 out of 6 roads that you mentioned, right? And we don't have a direct way to raise revenue locally. We don't have a local gas tax. We don't have a revenue source. So we rely on the state, and typically we've got gotten 30% of the state's transportation revenues. As you mentioned, that was taken away. So go ahead. I just wanted to give that context.
Yeah, that context is absolutely essential. In other states, you pay your vehicle registration. A big chunk of it goes to your home county,
right?
Or there's a gas tax built in for your county or for your city or whatever. We have none of that in Maryland. We're completely like the only horses pulling our cart is the state gas tax and the state transportation revenues. And that's supposed to be 30 cents on the dollar coming to the locals. And that's decades and decades of that working fine and being a good deal for Marylanders. And their transportation money was taking care of their transportation services.
And when people go to the gas station, they think
we're
that,
done.
Right, I'm paying for the roads, but that's not right. We're paying for roads with property taxes essentially right now. Right.
So we got axed in the summer of 2009, and I mean, the budget's already been cut, and then counties have to go out and basically just cancel all their projects. And so it's bonkers. We're laying off staff.
Can't even imagine.
Everything.
Right?
It's just because we have no way to make up that revenue. So, and this happens in August.
And you still got to fill the potholes, right? You got to find that money somewhere, right?
Yeah. So anyway, that was awful enough for that to be a couple of years while we're in the depths of the Great Recession.
Right.
But the fact is, they never dug out of it. When the budget reconciliation process a year or two later ended up basically saying this is going to be our distribution in perpetuity.
And what about all the other things they took, Michael? Like they also shifted other money, right? They needed to. It was tough time. What about all that? That came back, right?
All manner of different services and programs got cut for a year, and you had to take a year off on your formula, and you had to suffer through half funding for a year or two.
Which one would expect, right? In really tough times,
right? I mean, it's like you're throwing the cargo off the ship, like to get through the choppiest waters, right?
Sure.
But the history says you rebuild stuff, and this one they just didn't do. So here we are. Counties are still, after 2 years of patchovers to get us like one step closer and one step closer, our counties, I think for this year's budget, are something like 33 or 34 cents on the dollar of where they used to be. Like it just in raw dollar terms, not even adjusted for inflation or how many road miles you can patch up and stuff. Just in total dollar terms, we're at like a third of our number from 2008 or 2009 before the big cuts. It's crazy time.
And now again, there's counties still have to maintain the roads. They're still doing the safety projects. They're filling the potholes. But like you said, they're getting 34 cents on a dollar.
We're paying property taxes. That's what you're doing. Instead of paying your share sort of as a user fee, as a gas tax and a vehicle tax, you're paying property taxes to maintain your roads, and you don't even know it.
Right.
So several years ago, we had a number of allies in the legislature who believed it's time to move in the right direction. Let's step things up and do it for multiple years. Instead of that being a permanent fix, it was a temporary fix, and then there's a cliff effect. And lo and behold, the last year that we're protected in law is FY27. So this coming year's budget, we have to get our slight bump up. We're not back to full funding. Our counties are still suffering at whatever that number is, 33 cents on the dollar, something like that. But in 28, without an extension or a new bill or another step forward, we're going to fall way, way back. And that means a big loss for municipalities who don't have very many revenue sources. It's going to be a big loss for the counties who are still way behind where they're supposed to be, and a huge loss for the city of Baltimore, who's a one of one here that they manage all the state roads within their jurisdiction. So they don't have state-funded state highway teams coming in to take care of Route 40 and all these other numbered roads that are in Baltimore City. The city, these are like, elevated highways and high traffic areas and so forth. The city has a one-of-a-kind responsibility. And for them, I mean, this number's in the tens, like $70 million or something of that nature. Terrible time to pull the plug on dollars supporting every public service in Baltimore.
Absolutely. And, when you think about the cumulative effect back since 2009 until now and what that's meant for just Baltimore City, the numbers are enormous. So it's important to keep that in context. I will say MDOT and, the State Department of Transportation, they do their kind of road show, and they go to every county and they talk about projects and funding. And Baltimore City's had theirs last week, and they were fantastic. The mayor, the council, the city's House and Senate delegate, they were all there. And a common theme was highway user. Please don't let this fall off a cliff. We need the money. Look at all the great things we do with it. So they're hearing directly from local elected officials, from county governments, from the city. Hopefully we can find a way to make this work. But like you said, MACO is going to be very active. and very aggressive in terms of making sure that we don't fall off that cliff. We don't lose, what is it, $130 million overnight. And that balloons, when you look at it over 5 years, that turns into over $500 million. So it's really, really important that we take care of this transportation funding issue. And of course, we're not even talking about transit here, Michael. That's another huge issue moving forward. The state generally, I think, has to solve a lot of these transportation issues. But for right now, we're really worried about money for local roads to keep them safe, to keep them free of potholes, et cetera, and we can't fall off that cliff. So I think we need to keep moving forward, not moving backwards.
Right. No, totally well said. And when the one thing we had that was really great was the Department of Transportation was sort of canary in the coal mine about 2 years ago, late in calendar 23, sort of sounding the alarm saying we're going to need cash.
We're canceling everything.
We're going to have to like dump all sorts of things, right?
Yeah.
And highway user revenue was among those things, saying we're going to have to slash it right now, not even wait until it falls off the cliff. And we had legislators from literally every corner of the state showing up to say, what are you talking about? Like, there's local bus service that we need here. I'm worried about my transit project over here. And lots of folks talking about roads and bridges and safety needs at the local level in Baltimore, in Howard County, in Western Maryland, on the Eastern Shore. Every corner of the state, people are saying, you can't do this. We're already too far behind on that front. We ran a public hearing in the Appropriations Committee as an episode of this podcast because we couldn't have said it better ourselves to have the sequence of people talking about how much this means to local government. Mayor of Baltimore was among those speakers, and he just crushed it. Just easy home run.
And it's great to see, newer legislators that are coming in are interested in this issue. One of the things that we always worry about are people that are coming into the legislature. They don't know the history. They don't know how things used to be.
2009 is like, that's history book stuff, right? So fewer and fewer people remember the way it's supposed to be, and they just take this as, this is the way it is. So we do have younger people coming in that are interested, and now we have a lot of allies. So I think that's a good thing, but we got to get that bill passed. And Michael, if there's not enough chaos, and if
not
that
enough, yes, if that's not enough for you, if you really want some more chaos, let's talk about the federal government again and the increasing potential as we sit here on Thursday, September 25th, of the government shutting down. I think, Michael, the prediction markets are at about 75% at this point, and I'm about there. So, Michael, we do face the potential of yet another federal government shutdown. And, the federal fiscal year is one of a kind. It ends on September 30th. And without a spending deal, they would lapse into a government shutdown, likely with a round of argument over what services are essential, even while there's no agreement in place. So, Michael, we know for Maryland, this is a particularly big deal. We've written a lot about this on the blog. We'll link all that stuff. But talk about why, when the federal government shuts down, a lot of people think, well, you're just going to sit at home for a while, you'll watch TV during the day, and then you're going to get your paycheck eventually. Like, they'll make you whole eventually. But that's not the whole story, right?
Yeah, I think there's more to it, and certainly more to it from Maryland's perspective. I mean, trying to forecast whether this is going to happen is tricky stuff. Like we peddle our wares professionally in Annapolis. The General Assembly is complicated, and figuring out the moving parts here is difficult. Like, trying to understand what's going on with the United States Congress and the peculiar rules and procedures they have and so forth is difficult.
Thank goodness for NACO, the National Association of Counties. They're down there doing this work.
Right. So hats off to our national counterparts who are following this stuff, and that's the place to follow for the blow by blow and day by day. But from where we sit, probably the most important thing is the U.S. Senate has a process of basically it's a filibuster. Right? It's a standard practice as for like one chamber of a legislature. The Maryland Senate has this too.
Right.
You can stand up, and if you have enough votes, you don't need 50% of the votes, but if you have enough to keep a super majority vote from happening, then you can stand up and keep something from coming to a vote. And in the U.S. Senate, without belaboring the issue, they've made that procedure so easy. You just file a memorandum and say, some of us intend to filibuster this issue, and therefore you're going to need 60 votes to proceed.
Get ready. Right.
And in a close partisan U.S. Senate, 60 votes you need a bipartisan compromise. So this can't just be red team partisans, just saying, forget it, we have the majority here. They've got, 53 seats, I think? So they need a gaggle of blue votes to join them in any resolution here. I guess unless there's some puff of smoke and this becomes a 51 vote, which I don't understand exactly how that happens, but sometimes there are reconciliation things that only require a simple majority.
Right.
But this doesn't feel like that. No one's suggesting that. And without 60 votes, without collaboration across party lines, this looks like it's headed to shutdown. And I don't know who gets blamed. I don't know who gets dragged, and that's part of the politics. But it leads us to talk about this stuff seriously. So, like, with that as a lead-in, Maryland cares in a bunch of ways. Our economy certainly will be affected if there's a month-long shutdown of the federal government and most agencies tell their staff, stay home.
You're
we're
furloughed.
not going to be cutting checks. Right. We're not going to be able to, we're not going to run the building. We're not going to run the programs. You can't come to the parks. All those sorts of things happen. It will have an effect on the Maryland economy because there's so many federal agencies that are located here.
Right.
Maryland wasn't stupid saying, oh, we really would love to be tethered to the federal government. This is a great active decision. It's a no-brainer if the feds say, we want to administer the Social Security program. Would you like this in Baltimore County? Right. Hell yeah.
You want all these jobs.
Right, it's a lot of good jobs. It's a good,
high-paying
reliable employer under most circumstances. So I don't think it was a tactically bad decision for Maryland to become this attached. I mean, we'll send those jobs to West Virginia, Pennsylvania. We don't want them.
Right.
Doesn't, we would be in a much dire situation than we are today. So, anyhow, we'll feel it that way, but it's deeper than that too, because so much of Maryland's economy is sort of indirectly built on federal stuff too. So the presence of Pax River in St. Mary's County, or the presence of Aberdeen Proving Grounds, or the presence of NIH in Maryland creates a whole town gown of support industries and contractors and folks who do defense work or technical work or medical work. Like, all these folks are near those agencies because the proximity is helpful for them. Contractors don't get made whole.
Right.
Even if the feds go back and they patch over and say, we're going to pay you for those furloughed days, which they frequently do. I don't know. I don't know if long-time norms even matter today in the federal government.
Who knows?
Right? Who knows? But even if that happens and federal people are made whole later, and we kite them some loans or whatever to help them out through 6 tough weeks or something like that, the federal contractors who sit home don't make that deal. They don't work those weeks. Their folks are sitting around literally with nothing to do.
Right. And neither do the restaurants, the small businesses, like all these people who are part and parcel to all of these jobs and all of these people, they never get that money back. Right. So the longer something like this stretches on, the more likely you have that it is that small businesses might have to close, food vendors, food trucks, all these things that typically we don't think about are affected when you have something like this happening. This is an inherently political process. As you said, it's hard to predict like how this plays out. But the bottom line, I think, is that Maryland is the most affected state when you have a federal shutdown. While the state may be able to offer some loans, like you said, bridge loans to get people through, no interest loans, whatever, there is no doubt that a lot of contractors, a lot of businesses that are ancillary to federal employment are affected. And that even does flow through, Michael, to state and county income tax collections, right? And if you have fewer dollars coming in, fewer dollars are being paid in taxes. And that is something that we need to think about, especially if this is a protracted shutdown.
Right. I mean, this is adjacent, I suppose, not exactly a Maryland thing, but like I grew up in a small town that was like a General Motors town. There was a parts plant nearby, and you could tell in the neighborhood economy when that plant was like running the third shift because things are going gangbusters versus when they've laid off the second shift because we're in a lull. Right. And you could just tell at the grocery store, like the way things are going around town. I think Maryland has a not quite as exaggerated. We're not a company town exactly, but there are ripple effects that are very much like that. So you run a restaurant and you're going to have a couple of lean months. If the federal government is just down, you're just not going to be able to sell as many buffalo chicken salads to folks because they don't have $16 in their pocket this week, right? I mean, that's just going to be the way Maryland feels it. And it feels cold to talk about that as a revenue thing. I mean, we're talking dollars and cents in government. Right. It's going to be a community, and like your neighbors are going to feel this too. And okay, so back to brass tacks for the counties, that means there will be more demand for services that we provide for help, and we need help with transportation, or my elderly parent needs more help, and I can't provide it this week because reasons, right? Right. So like that ripple effect is going to land in government revenues and services, as well as in and around the community. We're going to feel it.
And of course, counties are going to step up because they always do. And this is what counties do in Maryland. The state also steps up, and I'm not saying the state won't, but certainly counties are going to feel it on the ground, like you said, Michael, mostly through services, through trying to help people and make sure they have what they need. So a lot of turbulent times ahead, and some in the near term, some in the long term, Michael. But I feel like, I mean, we're not rosy people, especially when it comes to, about money. But actually for this, I feel like it's hard to even get close to sniffing rosy when you look at all these potential landmines out there. Again, some near term, some long term.
I think that says it well, right? I mean, that's fine. Yeah, I get the doom and gloom label as Mako goes out and visits our county governing bodies. Then we're on the agenda for the county commissioners, or we have breakfast with the council, or other things like that. And when I talk through fiscal issues, it's sort of been an abbreviated version of this conversation without necessarily all these bits and pieces. But as we forecast, like, the state's okay for a while, but then it gets way upside down, and this uncertainty is to the negative, and we're all going to feel it. And the demand for services might spike just as you're losing revenues. Like, everybody's like, sorry, forgive me, but our Queen Anne's County Commissioner, Jack Wilson, is the Mako president, and he and I, just earlier this week, we were in Kent County on the Eastern Shore and met with them at their public meeting. And as we're wrapping up, they said, "Are you going to Caroline next? Is that your next stop?" We said, "We're driving down to Caroline. We're going to meet with them." He says, "I'm going to call Caroline and tell them, lock the door. Don't let them in. You don't want this update."
It's bad news. It's bad news. Those are tough conversations. But look, like we've talked about, the state's numbers don't look good, especially in the out years. We have a problem with the Transportation Trust Fund. Our road money is about to fall off a cliff. We have to get that fixed. The state has no money to be spending, particularly in the out years. We have volatile revenues. Counties are now exposed to more potential cost shifts. We have the blueprint mandate. We have all these infrastructure issues and needs that keep growing. So things are rough. But again, we're going to get through it. The General Assembly is going to come back to Annapolis. We'll see how things look. We're going to get a new revenue estimate today, Michael, September 25th. So we'll see how that looks. I don't think it's going to look great, but things are going to keep rolling on. We're going to keep getting through this. And I think the biggest thing here, Michael, the biggest takeaway is that we're going to defend against cost shifts. We're going to come and talk about the importance of road funding. We know that there are a lot of asks for the state, but these things are part and parcel to our economy, right? Good roads, you need good roads to move goods. You need good roads to get to school, to get to work. Like, these are things that people expect, and we need to deliver them.
Right. I think the way I've been trying to phrase it increasingly is that when Mako comes to Annapolis, when you typically testify at the budget reconciliation bill hearing. That's effectively like the budget plan writ large.
Right.
The big BRFA bill hearing is a 4-hour spectacle in each chamber. And you usually show up. Sometimes it's with a panel of people. Sometimes it's you just trying to be on point. But like, we're here to defend the services that every county delivers to everybody in Maryland. It's not so much we're here on behalf of this county commissioner or that council or whatever. It's like, we're here because you entrust the counties to deliver most of the essential services to most people in Maryland. There are cities and towns who augment that and do more and go further and so forth, but there's a laundry list of things that they leave to the counties to get done. And when they shift costs on us, it just squeezes our ability to fund education and to be prepared for public health and to get into to take care of our infrastructure and to properly plan for growth and development and housing. And like, the whole list of things that are county first. That's why we show up in Annapolis, to say we've got to continue to do that stuff well. It's not an if, right? These things have to get done. It's a mixed bag getting that message across in Annapolis, but in this window of time, it's our most important message.
Yes, and we haven't even talked about major issues with emergency management funding and disasters. We haven't talked about the growing costs of school construction. These are all topics, maybe, Michael, for future episodes. But I think we've given folks enough to digest today. Anything we didn't get into, Michael, that's on your mind as we sit here at getting close to October?
Right. So we get the official state forecast today. If that's a modest write down in the forecast, which would kind of be my guess, I don't think that is like a new tier of turbulence. I don't think that's gonna.
No,
that's kind of baked into most of our expectations. If you've been paying attention, we're assuming something along those lines. I think it would take a really big shock for this next legislative session to be a panic.
Yes.
So I think that's a reasonable forecast, is this next year doesn't have to be break the glass, sound the alarm. It's rather, okay, we can patch this over. We've got some carryover money from last year. You can use that to make this year's budget be fine. We're not going to have to send people packing. We're not going to have to take people off of Meals on Wheels, my favorite example of like you do away with a service and people go, what the heck?
Right.
So I don't think it'll be that kind of environment. So, we ought to be able to stay on this tightrope for a while longer. But like through the stuff we've laid out, there's work to be done. The state right now is casting around for a new budget director.
Tough gig.
And that's a tough gig. And someone's going to sit down with the dossier at that desk and be reading a more detailed version of the stuff we just talked about. I do not envy her or him sitting in that desk because they got a lot of stuff lined up.
I don't either. And Michael, I'll ask you one more question. So this next session with all this stuff, and you said it probably shouldn't be break the glass, but this is going into an election year. You've been through a lot of these sessions. How do those typically play out? Like, how do you see this playing out as, again, everyone's up for election in the next year?
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough being an incumbent. I don't mean this as a criticism, but you want to come out of your 4 years. If you've been a delegate for 4 years, you want to come out of this telling the voters who supported you 4 years ago, this is the stuff I did, and I was part of the team that accomplished this.
Yep.
I took these votes, and I want to run on my record.
And I cut these ribbons, right?
Yeah,
Those are important, right?
So like some of that is just simple. Like I helped this project, and now we're expanding the library, and I'm really proud of that, and that's great. Okay, that takes money to do that stuff. Projects take money. Launching new programs and solving big problems typically takes money. So how do you cap off the 4-year term this year if we literally come into it with our pockets turned out and empty?
Not ideal.
It's probably going to be a year. We know this happens around town. There's usually a number leaks out that legislative leaders have said, you can't pass a bill with more than an X dollar fiscal note. And in good years, it might be $1.5 million. You can spend $1 million without really consulting with the budget people. But recently, like last year, that number was something like $50,000, $100,000. Like you can't hire a person to run a new program without getting the Budget and Tax Committee to sign off on it, right?
Literally, you got to get a double sign off.
Yeah. So, I think this sets up as that kind of environment, and that'll be frustrating for rank and file, particularly members of the majority party, to say, like, we should all be behind this. Yeah, but like you have to hire 5 new people. We need a whole new computer system. This thing has a $6 million fiscal note. We just can't pass that bill this year. And so, I don't know, you end up doing things with delayed effective dates, or you set long-term goals and programs that will build up over time and maybe cost money in their long-term implementation, but not short-term. There's ways around the short-term fiscal crisis that sometimes lead us to, like, we kind of paint ourselves into a corner here and there. So anyway, that's a long-winded way of saying it requires some finesse in a year like this when there's no money to spend.
All right. Well, I think that's a good place to leave it for today. We talked through a lot. We're going to put all of these links that we talked about in the podcast notes so that you can go read the blog and anything else that we've gotten into. As always, you should follow along on social media, Facebook, Twitter. And then, of course, as I mentioned, you should be reading the Conduit Street blog. But for Michael Sanderson and for our wonderful producer, Chantel Malcolm Lim, this is Kevin Kinnally signing off, and we will talk to you soon.